Ready? You ready? I'm waiting on you. Oh, I think it's on. It's on. Wait till you finish praying. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا اللهم زدنا علما إنك أنت عليم الحكيم اللهم اجعل هذه المحاضرة حجة لنا لا حجة علينا يا رب العالمين أما بعد. Today inshallah ta'ala this is our 12th class in the book Zaad Al-Mustaq'ni from Abu Musa Al-Hajjawi rahimahullah ta'ala. Today inshallah we're going to cover Al-Mamsuhat. Al-Mamsuhat. And I'm looking at the time, right? Inshallah it's a lot to cover. We're going to try to cover it all tonight inshallah. All right. So in Islam, and before we actually go to the book, we're going to summarize everything really quick so that we can have an idea of what we're talking about, and then we'll go to the text just to make sure everything's understood. So we have something in Islam called memsuhat, right? Memsuhat are the things that we can wipe over. So before I talk about it, in your mind, what are some things that you can wipe over? Don't read yet.
I ain't read.
So you saying you can wipe over a gutra? What's a gutra? You know what a gutra is? You know what? He doesn't know what. What's a gutra? What is that?
A headscarf.
A headscarf. You leaving?
No.
All right. A headscarf. What's a headscarf? What does it look like?
It's made of cloth.
So do you wrap it around your head, or you just put it over your head?
They have both types.
I'm asking you, the one that you can wipe over.
I believe it's the headscarf, the one that you wrap it around, but I'm not sure.
All right. What else? Can you wipe over anything else?
Turban.
You can wipe over a turban. So is there a difference between a turban and a headscarf?
One is.
There's no difference.
I don't know.
All right, we'll get back. Anything else?
Socks.
You can wipe over your socks. Any socks? You looking at yours? Huh? You can wipe over socks? Huh? You sure? Okay. Can we wipe over anything else? Kuffs.
You have armor on.
Kuff, huh?
Like if you have armor on.
Armor? You can wipe over armor?
I heard.
Yeah. I never heard that. Anything else?
So you have a bandage.
You can wipe over a bandage?
Like if you hurt.
You can? Okay. Anything else? So these are all things you would tell somebody.
No.
Okay. Can you wipe over anything else? Can a woman wipe over a khimar?
Yes.
She can?
No, I don't know.
Don't get scared.
I just think because we're talking about headscarf.
Right.
And we said we can't wipe over headscarf.
We didn't get to that. I'm just asking you all now. Can a woman wipe over a khimar? You say no. So if she's out in public, she has to use McDonald's to go to the bathroom. She can't wipe over her khimar. She has to take her whole joint off or everything off.
No, not everything.
I mean, take her head covering on. That's rough, don't you think? It is. MashaAllah. Huh? Anything else? All right. So we're going to talk about 4 things that can be wiped over. 3 of them take the same ruling and 1 of them take a separate ruling. All right. So there are 4 things that can be wiped over. 3 of them take similar rulings and the last one is a different ruling. All right. The first thing that can be wiped over is a khuf. What is a khuf? A khuf is a leather sock. Now I know everyone's saying, well, I don't wear leather socks. You wear leather socks? No. So that's not where we live at. That's not, people don't wear leather socks, all right? So there are numerous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. You can find where it says Jorab is another name. Sakhakin is another name. And there are different names, right? A sakhakin are things that keep your feet warm. Jorab is another name for socks, right? So socks, khuf, anything like that, you can wipe over. That's the first one. The second one is a imama. Imama, not a gutra. Imama. So what's the imama? Let's say, for example, I know in Sudan in particular, right? Sometimes they wrap something like a turban around their heads and it goes under their neck and around their heads, right? That means if they needed to wipe, it would be very difficult. So a person might be listening to this and say, if a man, because women don't wear turbans, right? They don't wear imamas, only men do. So if a man could potentially wipe over, why can't a woman wipe over a khimar? Can a sister wipe over a khimar?
Yes.
She can? Huh? I'm asking you. Because you just walked in. That's why I'm putting you on the spot. She can. So if you out and your wife uses a bag, like, go ahead, babe, you can wipe over your khimar. Go ahead.
But before we do it, just wipe over.
Making wudu.
Yeah.
All right. You firm on that?
I guess this is what she read. That's what she told me.
Huh?
That's what my wife told me.
That's what she told you?
Yeah.
Right. So then the third thing is khimar. A woman can wipe over her khimar. Right? A sister can wipe over her khimar. Now, these are the first 3 things. They all take the similar ruling. And we're going to talk about that real quick. In order for you to wipe over socks, khuf, imama, something that wraps around the head of a man, or a khimar for a woman, before we talk about those things, there are 5 conditions in order for a person to wipe over those things. 5 conditions, okay? The first condition is that it has to be with hadath al-asghar. What is hadath al-asghar? Does anyone know? A small or minor hadath. What does that mean? No. Hadath al-asghar is like, let's say, for example, a person urinates, breaks wind, defecates, something like that. Anything like that that doesn't necessitate a ghusl. Anything that does not necessitate a ghusl, you can wipe over. So the first thing is, now, before you can wipe over, there are 5 conditions that must be met. All right? The first one is, it has to be a minor hadith, meaning something that does not necessitate a ghusl. That's number 1. Number 2, the thing that you are wiping over must be clean. And what I mean by clean, not najis. So you can't have like some socks on that has urine on the bottom of it because you was walking. You understand what I'm saying? All right. The third thing, it has to be mubah. The thing that you're wiping over has to be something that is allowable for you to use. The fourth thing is mudda muhaddada, which means that it can only be for a certain amount of time. What's the time period? If a person wanted to wipe over their socks, their imama, or a woman wanted to wipe over her khimar, what's the time frame?
Day and the night.
The day and the night?
Like 24 hours, day and the night.
24 hours. What do you say?
I heard, if I'm not mistaken, from the salat that you did it to the next salat.
So from
to the next same salat.
So from the same salat the next day. What do you think? You don't know.
For a traveler.
So how long? It's the same time?
3 days.
3 days for who?
Traveler.
3 days for a traveler. What about the other person?
Like you said, I'm believe that they did it at Fajr to the next one.
So Fajr to Fajr.
Right.
So when does the time start?
Once they did it. Right.
So let's say, for example, I got some socks on. Wait, before we get into my example, we got to finish this last point. The last point is Kamal al-Tahara. That before you wipe over these things, you must be in a state of total purification. Does it make sense? So right now, before we put socks on and you want to wipe over, the first thing is before you wipe them on or before you wipe over them, is it a hadith asghar? Did you make a small, did you break your fast by urinating or something like that? If the answer is yes, and then you got made wudu, cool. Then you go wipe over it, right? The second thing is that the thing that you're wiping over, it has to be clean, pure. Cool, you got that. That checked the next box. The third thing is the thing that you're wiping over, meaning your socks, they have to be, not only do they have to be clean, but they have to be permissible for you to use. Maybe, for example, you didn't steal them. You didn't steal. So if you stole somebody's socks, it may not be permissible for you to wipe over them because you stole them, right? The fourth thing is it can only be for a select amount of time. And the fifth thing is prior to putting them on, you must be in a state of purification. Is that clear? Yes. What's not clear?
So when you say you have to be in a state of total purification,
meaning either a ghusl or wudu. Okay? Either a ghusl or wudu. Now, let's get back to my question. Right now, you woke up, you prayed Fajr. All right? You made wudu. You put your socks on after washing your feet. So now you put on clean socks, right? And you have them on all day. When does it start for you to wipe over your socks? Yani, when does the time end? Because you said if you're local, then it's 1 day. When does the time start?
When does it start? When you first do it.
It starts when you first what?
I'm sorry, when you first made wudu.
When you first put your socks on, that's when the time starts. Right. Okay. Does anyone agree with that? You agree? You agree? Yeah,
once you
as soon as you put them on, so it starts right there. As soon as you put the socks on. All right. Make a note of that. Now we're going to come back to that before class is over, inshallah. All right. Anyone disagree with that? Not just so make a note of it. Do you agree with him? Yeah. Okay. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that it starts once he breaks.
It's what?
Once he breaks
Once he breaks, we'll do.
Yeah, then you do it, and that's when it starts.
So which is it? Is it what he said or is it?
No, this thing is not what we went over this thing for.
With me?
No, not with you.
Oh.
You know, this is what the kid is talking about.
He might got a point.
You know what I mean?
What did you say? I'm sorry.
I said, you just said make it movie, put your socks on. You're saying it starts there. I was saying that once you break it, then that's when it starts.
So he says when you break your wudu, that's when it starts. You say as soon as you put them on, that's when it starts. Any other positions? So you guys don't wipe over your socks? You wipe over. So what rule do you use?
I use the one I said.
All right. What about you? Huh?
When I put them on, when it started.
Oh, all right. No, that's a safe. If that's the position, guys, that's safe. It may not be accurate though, but it's definitely safe. It's definitely safe. All right. So then, it's 3 things, right? The khuf, the socks, the amama, and the khimar. They all take the same what? Ruling, right? Any questions about that so far? You can wipe over, right? But these conditions have to be met. Hadith asghar, It has to be pure. It has to be allowable for you to use it only for a limited time, and you have to have total purification. Is that clear? All right. The next thing is the fourth thing. The fourth thing that we can wipe over is, in Arabic, is called jabira. In English, we will consider that a cast. All right. Let's say, for example, a person breaks their arm. You break your foot. All right. So you may have a cast on your hand. So in order for a person to use that cast in general, the scholars of Islam, they come up with two conditions. And then we're gonna read through the text and we're gonna talk about some of the differences, etc. Right? The first thing is that la yatajawaz qadr al-haja, which means that if you break your arm here, then it shouldn't be all the way up here. So the question now is, who determines how much of the arm the cast should cover? Who determines that? You or me? The doctors, ahlul khibra, the people that specialize in that, not us. If a person breaks their arm here and a brother comes to the masjid and his arm broke, you know how some brothers are, oh, akhi, get over here. I just studied in the class, you only broke this portion, the cast should only be here. It's haram what you're doing, right? Before you get, because that's not what you're qualified to do. It's not your lane. A doctor, they have specific lanes. That's their lane, yes.
Does the bandage, as you mentioned earlier, brother, does that fall under this category?
So when you say bandage, right now a cast is considered bandage.
Like if you have a cut or like a
So it depends. So here, there's a hadith of Shujja. There was a man who came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he was in a state of janaba, right? And so he didn't get a chance to speak to the Prophet ﷺ, but some of the companions, he said, do I have to make a ghusl? He had a shaqqa in his head. He had a hole in his head. And he went to the companions and said, listen, how do I make a ghusl and I got a hole in my head? What do I do? Is there something else for me to do? They said, no, you have to make a ghusl. He made a ghusl and he died. Right? And so the Prophet ﷺ said all he had to do, if somebody would have told him, knew better, all he had to do was put something over his head and wipe over it. So that it depends on the bandage. If water can if water can get to it, then there are options, things to cover that. Right? And we'll talk about that in later detail, inshallah. So the first condition about the cast is that it should not exceed the limits, meaning it shouldn't be excessive. But the only people that have to determine that are doctors, not us. And the second one, they say ba'da kamal al-tahara, that a person has to have total purification before you put a cast on. Now, that's problematic, right? How many people break their arm and say, Dad, let me make wudu real quick before the doctor put a cast on? Is that realistic? It's not realistic. So because of that, the scholars of Islam, they have two positions on that. Some say it's a condition to have purification before they put it on, and some say no. And we're going to talk about that as we start the class. So we didn't really start yet. This is just a little quick summary. Any questions so far before we go through the text? Yes.
Shayla's and Kimar, is there different?
A shayla. I don't even know what is a shayla anyway.
Shayla is like.
I'll explain. What a khimar is was understood by khimar. A khimar is what a woman wears, wraps over her head, covers her head. All of this is covered. A shayla, I don't know. Is that an English word? It's something that an English term. I don't know what that means.
So it's like a scarf as well, and you can wrap it.
But did they use it as a khimar?
No, see, it's not as loose as a Kimar. It's more tighter.
I thought a khimar was tight.
They pin it. They wrap it and pin it.
So a khimar is tight. It's not loose.
I'll talk to you later, inshallah.
All right.
It's like the same thing.
It's the same thing. All right. So, any other questions before we get started? Yes.
You said about the length of time.
So we're gonna. I told him to make a note of that. We're gonna come back to that, right? So, Babu Masal Khufain. So this is how the chapter starts, right? So the author, he starts off by explaining the chapter of dealing with wiping over things, right? It says, Yajuzu Yoman Walilatan. The first thing they mention is that wiping over things is permissible in Islam. Yoman Walilatan. 1 day and 1 night. Lil Mukim. Lil Mukim is the one who is stationary, the non-traveler, like what the Sheikh mentioned. What that means is we're going back to the 3: the khuf, the imama, and the khimar. A sister can wipe over her khimar yawman walilan, a whole day. So if a sister's at work, imagine a sister's at work, Dhuhr comes in, she has to go to the bathroom to make wudu, then she has to take her whole thing off. La. She can wipe over her khimar, right? And this is what the author is saying here. It says, Yajuzu yawman walilatan. It's permissible for 1 day and 1 night, lil muqim, for the one that is stationary. Wali musafirin thalatatan bilayaliha min hadathin ba'da lubsi ala tahirin mubah. And for the traveler has 3 days and 3 nights, right? And then he's going to mention some of the conditions. We already mentioned the conditions, but we'll mention them here. Hadathin asghar, a small hadith, meaning urination, breaking one, etc. Or and the thing that they use must be clean. It must be allowable for that person to use. And it has to be satiran lil mafrud. It has to cover what is supposed to be covered when wiping over. So let's talk about the socks. Can you wipe over ankle socks? Can you wipe over, let's say, all right, let's talk about what kind of socks can you wipe over? You can wipe over ankle socks.
Cover your ankle.
They have to cover your ankle, or can it just touch your ankle? And we need some proof, though. Oh, they say, oh, no, I'm cool. Can you wipe over your ankle socks? If they don't cover your ankles? You can or you can't? So if your ankle socks don't cover your ankles, but you can still wipe over them. You can. You're supposed to wipe them. No, we're not talking about wash. We're talking about wipe. Okay.
So I'm saying you can because it's not covered by the law of sock.
I'm asking you, can you wipe over ankle socks that don't cover your ankles? Because then they got the half ankle socks, right? Socks that don't all the way cover your ankles. Can you wipe over those? You can. Okay. Can you? Does anyone agree with that? Disagree with that?
I disagree, but without any proof, I don't.
You disagree with no proof. All right.
You said you have to. You just said.
Yeah. What you think, Sheikh? Talk to me. Talk to me, man.
I'm just gonna say they gotta be covered.
What has to be covered? Your ankle has to be covered. So whoever says you have to cover your ankle, what evidence do you have?
You have to be in total purification, meaning that area has to be already washed before you put the sock on.
Okay.
So if you're wiping it over, and it's
So what is proof in Islam? Quran, Sunnah, Ijma'. And there's a host of other things, but those are the things that there's no difference in, right? So in a case like this, what do we say? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ, if you stand to pray, فَاغْسِلُوا وَجُوهَكُمْ, wash your face. وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ, wash your arms up to your elbows. وَامْسَحُوا بِرَؤُوسِكُمْ, wipe your heads. وَأَرْجُوا لَكُمْ, in your feet. إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ, to your ankles. So a person may say, okay, in order for you to wipe over your socks must cover your ankles based on the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ma'idah, where Allah says, وَأَرْجُوا لَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ, your feet, he says, wash your feet up into your ankles. So if you're not going to be washing your feet, then the thing that must be covered must also include what? Your ankles. So that means if your ankles are exposed, You cannot wipe over your socks. I'll give you one better. I see brothers wear sneakers, regular sneakers. They're not ankle, they're not high tops, they're regular, and they'll wipe over their sneakers and pray like that. This is batil. It's incorrect. You can't wipe over your sneakers that don't cover your ankles.
Even if you have socks on that cover your ankles?
If you have socks on that cover your ankles, then you wipe over your socks, not over your sneakers. Does that make sense? Because if your sneaker covered your ankles, then you can wipe over your sneakers. But if you wipe over, no, we're going to get into another issue. If you wipe over your sneakers and then take your sneakers off, let's say you wiped over your socks and then took your socks off to go pray. Do you still have wudu? Many of the scholars of Islam say, la, you don't have wudu. This is a majority of the scholars of Islam. From the Salaf, this is a majority of the companions hold the position that it breaks your wudu. Tayyib. Why? Why does it break your wudu? If you remember, the last class we took, we said that from the conditions of making wudu is what? Remember, we said it has to be in order. And what was the thing that came after being in order?
It can't dry.
It can't dry. If you take your socks off, then you have a portion of your body that hasn't been washed for wudu, and the rest of your body parts are dry. So they consider this breaks the principle or the condition of muwalat. Does that make sense? It's a lot to it, but that's just in general. So we're going to continue. Any questions so far? So then your socks must cover your what? Ankles. Yes.
So if I had Timberlands on, will I be able to wipe over my Timberlands?
If you had Timberland, you answer that question. What do you think? Based off what we said.
Yeah, I believe so.
What the condition of what? What do you have to do before you put your Timberlands on? It depends on what kind of Timberlands you talk. Oh, because you young. I don't know what type of Timberlands you talking about. The chuckers or the
I'm talking about all the way up. The trees. Yeah,
what do you call them? We all
It's a double sole.
double.
the 6 inches though.
6 inches.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. All right. So here's a condition. If you wear Timbs like that, that's fine. But the problem is if you wear them and you don't tie them up and they're loose and they flop off your foot and your ankle somehow gets exposed. You know how the young boys, you know how when we were young, your foot kind of flops out. If that's the case, then you can't do it. Why is that? And we'll get to the next portion here. It says, يَثْبُتُ بِنَفْسِهِ مِنْ خُفٍ وَجَوْرَدٍ وَصَفِيقٍ وَنَحْوِهِمَا. So the next part speaks to what he said. If you have shoes on and they're tied up, they can't flop. So to the point where your ankles come out. Or you can't even have socks on that are very loose. That you have ankle socks that cover your ankles, but they might slide down and show part of your ankle. In that case, you can't use those. But it has to be something that is tight fitting around your foot and your ankle. Does that make sense? But most people don't wear Timbs like that, do they? Yeah, you don't strangle them. So you gotta really strangle them, Jones. Right? Tell you. Any questions? All right, so go ahead, Sheikh.
You just said about the foot being wet. What did you say about that? Basically, so when you perform wudu, so you can air dry or go ahead and dry it off?
You can dry off or air dry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Why you ask
You
that?
said something about something
You
being
missed
wet.
the point.
No, the point was, so in the last class, we spoke about something called mu'alat,
Okay.
right? When you make wudu, the conditions of wudu, right? So the first thing is that it has to be in order. Once you finish the order, the next step is mu'alat, meaning one body part can't dry before you finish making wudu.
Okay.
So if you wiped over your socks and then you took your socks off and then still found that, your feet are going to be dry now, but and your rest of your body's already dry, so you don't have more of that. So then you have to. Some of the scholars say, how do you fix that? Some of the scholars say it breaks your wudu in totality. Some say you just wash your feet. Some say you go and make wudu all over again. And then there also is a portion of the ulama say that it doesn't break your wudu. That's just not the majority. Yes.
To answer all that in a nutshell, I read a book. It's the Prophet's Prayer Described, and it said that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam he would never pray with his shoes on. He would take his shoes off. So actually, the answer to that.
So there are narrations where I'm praying with shoes on. Yeah. There are narrations like that. That's the beautiful thing about Islam, right? Islam is not one way. So if you read certain books about the salat from some of the scholars, you would think that this is the only way. And anyone that's in opposition to that is problematic, right? But then when you learn, you get the opportunity to learn more, you realize that there are other positions that are strong, supported, permissible, right? And the benefit of that, though, it prevents extremism, right? So it's easy to become extreme in a religion. If a person has one piece of information and you know other people don't know it, you're like, I know this. So a lot of times what we do is we take that piece of information we have, and if we see anybody acting in contrary to that information we have, then we say something. We admonish them. We put ourselves in position as authority over them because they don't know. But in reality, that's not the case all the time, right? So the next part here, it says, وَعَلَى إِمَامَةٍ لِرَجُلٍ مُحَنَّكَةٍ أَوْ ذَاتٍ ذُؤَابَةٍ. So the next thing says we can also wipe over an imama, right? Wrap around the head and over around the neck, right? But people here don't really wear imamas, right? That's that. And then it says, وَعَلَى خُمْرٍ نِسَاءٍ مُدَارَةٍ تَحْتَ حُلُقِهِنَّ فِي حَدَثٍ أَسْقَرٍ. So now it's talking about the women. When they wear their khimar, it has to cover their neck. It has to be all wrapped all the way around their neck and all of that, right? In that case, a woman can wipe over, provided the conditions are the same. And then we get to the other part. Jabiratan lam yatajawaz qadra haja. The cast cannot. Okay, so how do we do that? What does that even look like? You break your arm. We'll talk about that later because I have a whole section about how we do that. So remind me to go over that, right? How to make wudu if you have a cast. So it says, Jabiratan lam yatajawaz qadr al-haja. If you have a cast, it doesn't exceed the place where it's necessary. Right? You confused? Okay. It says, walau fi akbar ila halliha. Even if a person has. Why did I make a distinction between a cast and wiping over the socks, the khimar and the imama? Why did I make a distinction between them and the cast? What are some of the differences? Why did I separate them? Because the cast you can't remove. No, but why did I said that the rulings for the socks, the khimar, and the imama is different than the jabira, than the cast. Why? Because the cast can't get removed. What's another reason? Because a cast is out of necessity. Whereas the other things, it's not out of necessity, right? What else? So you don't have control. Okay. For a cast, a person could put a cast on even if it's hadith akbar. Meaning, let's say, for example, they have janaba. And they say that janaba, which is sexual impurity, they can still wipe over the cast. unlike the khimar, the imama, and the khuf. Unlike those things, which you can't, right? Right. And a person wears a cast until they are cured from whatever the injury is. It says, وَإِذَا لَبِسَ ذَلِكَ بَعْدَ كَمَالِ الطَّهَارَةِ وَمَنْ مَسَحَ فِي سَفَرٍ لَمْ أَقَامْ or ثُمَّ أَقَامْ وَعَكْسٍ. Okay, so what the author is mentioning here is a fourth of conditions that we mentioned earlier. And from them is that before you put those things on, you should have purification, right? You should have purification. وَمَنْ مَسَحَ فِي سَفَرٍ ثُمَّ أَقَامْ. So if a person is traveling, right? It says, وَمَنْ مَسَحَ فِي سَفَرٍ. So let's assume we're in socks. We're talking about socks, right? Or a sister in her khimar. It says, وَمَنْ مَسَحَ فِي سَفَرٍ. If she's traveling or he's traveling, she can wipe over her khimar, he can wipe over his socks. Thumma aqam. So they travel from New York or wherever and they come to Philly. Or it says, oh, aks. Or they start off home and then they travel somewhere else. Oh, shakka fi ibtida'ihi. Or they have doubt about when the wiping started. That's realistic, right? Dad, when did I start wiping? It says, فَمَسْحَ مُقِيمٍ. If you have doubts that, Dad, when did I start wiping? He said, if that's the case, then you wipe over as if you are a stationary non-traveler. That means 1 day and 1 night, if you have doubts. However, if you don't have doubts, then you can wipe according to the 3 days and the 3 nights. And then it says, وَإِنْ أَحْدَثَ ثُمَّ سَافَرَ قَبْلَ مَسْحِهِ فَمَسَ مُسَافِرًا. So let's say, for example, you're sitting at home and you have your socks on, you're good. You go to the bathroom. When you leave the bathroom, you don't make wudu and you start traveling. And you wind up in North Carolina. But you broke your wudu in Philly, but now you're in North Carolina. It says, وَإِنْ أَحْدَثَ ثُمَّ سَافَرَ. So you broke your wudu and then you traveled. قَبْلَ مَسْحِهِ. And you did not make wudu. You didn't wipe over your socks while you were in Philly. It says, مَسْحِهِ فَمَسْحَ مُسَافِرًا. When you do go to make wudu in North Carolina, for example, then you can wipe over as if you are a traveler. That means you can go 3 days and 3 nights as a traveler, right? Somebody might say, what's the delil for that? It says, هذه صورة إجماع عليه. This is a consensus of the Sahaba about this particular issue. The delil, the evidence to support that, is a consensus from the Sahaba. All right. So the next part. It says, وَلَا يَمْسَحُ الْقَلَانِسَ. Qalanisa is a kufi, like this. You can't wipe over this, right? وَلَا لِفَافَ. A lifaf is something you wrap around, like this, right? You can't wipe over that. Like, say you just wrap something around your arm.
How is it?
A lifaf is something like you can even use it to wrap around your head, like around your face or something like that. But you can't wipe over that. You can't, like, if you wrap something around your arm or your hand, like a cloth or something, you can't wipe over a cloth. You can't do that. Maybe like an ace bandage, something like that. It says, وَلَا مَا يَسْقُطُ مِنْ قَدَمٍ أَوْ يُرَى مِنْهُ بَعْضُهُ. Or you can't wipe over something, shoes that's not all the way tied, and they fall off your feet. Or if you're walking in the clunks and you see a piece of your ankle or something like that, you can't wipe over that. فَإِنْ لَبِسَ خُفٍّ عَلَى خُفٍّ قَبْلَ الْحَدَثِ فَالْحُكْمُ لِلْفَوْقَانِ. If a person wears socks and he puts another pair of socks over another pair of socks, say he has two pair of socks on, then he can wipe over the top sock if he wants to. It's permissible. Or you can wipe over the sock underneath. Okay? Without wiping over the top side. All right, so now I'm going to talk about how you actually wipe over the things, right? And this is where we're going to get into the next part here. It says, وَيَمْسَهُ أَكْثَرُ الْإِمَامَةِ أَكْثَرُ الْإِمَامَةِ. So if a person has an imama, where they wipe over their head, they're going to wipe over most of it or almost all of it. Same ruling goes to a khimar. If a sister has a khimar and she's at work, etc., she shouldn't have to take her whole khimar off of her head. Rather, she can wipe over. She can wipe over it. طيب. It says وظاهر القدم الخفي من أصابعه إلى ساقه دون أسفله وعاقبه. If a person is wiping over their socks, how do you wipe over the sock? If you're wiping over your sock, do you wipe the bottom of your sock or the top of your sock? The top. So you take the water, you go from the tip of your toes and rub them up like this, up to your leg almost. Is that understood? طيب. وعلى جميع الجبيرة. And as for the cast, you wipe over the whole cast. We'll talk about that in a second. We're just going to finish this. It says متى ظهر بعد محل الفرق بعد الحدث أو تمت مدته استأنف الطهارة. It says whenever a piece of a person's ankle becomes apparent, or if a sister's hair becomes apparent, or if the amama cover that you have, if you can see it, if that becomes apparent, then you can't wipe over. You must make wudu all over again and then put them back on again. Does that make sense? Meaning you can't wipe anymore. So if your socks, let's say you have socks and you pull your sock off your foot and you put it back on, according to the text here, you must make the wudu all over again. Does that make sense?
Saying while you're in the process of making wudu?
No. You can just take your sock off anyway.
Oh, anywhere. So once you take it off.
Once you take it off, you can't wipe no more. That makes sense? All right, so let's talk about the cast really quick. If a person has a cast, because this is an important issue. A lot of people break stuff, right? Twist your ankle. You can do a lot of, break your ankle, whatever. If a person has a cast on, one of the ways, and it's a whole big section on it, but we'll keep it simple, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. When we have casts, right? Let's say, for example, the cast is you have purification before you put the cast on, and the cast covers the area it's supposed to cover. So there's no question about that, right? How do you make wudu with the cast? First thing you start off is you make wudu regular. You wash your hands, your face, etc. Now let's say you broke your arm right here. When it comes to washing your arm, you don't. If it's just your hand, you wash the part of your hand. But if it's from here to there, you don't. When it comes to washing this part, you wipe over it, the whole cast. You wipe over the whole cast. And then you continue with the rest of your wudu. That's the first part. That's the first scenario. We're going to give you 3 more. The second scenario, it says, إِذَا اخْتَلَّ شَرْطٌ قَدْرَ الْحَاجَةِ. If you leave off the part where, let's say, for example, the cast is supposed to be here, right? But you got the cast covering your whole entire arm, but it only needs to be here. We're not saying this. A doctor is saying that. Oh, they made a mistake. They say, oh, we made a mistake. It really should have been up to here, but we only have it covered to here. It should only be here, but it's covered all the way up to here. Okay? In a case like this, you make the wudu, you wipe over the whole area, and then you make tayammum. Why do you make tayammum? You start off, you make wudu regular. You make your wudu. When you get to this part, you wipe over the part that you're supposed to wipe over. And then for the other, let's say that it only covers here. That's where the cast should have been, but it goes all the way up to your elbow. So this whole area here is supposed to be washed, but you can't get to it. So because you can't get to this and it's extra, it shouldn't be there, then the ulama say you wipe over the part you're supposed to, and for the additional part here, you make tayammum for that additional part. Does that make sense? If it don't make sense, ask. All right, let it process for a minute. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to let it sink in and then ask your question. It don't make sense. All right, just say that. So what part don't make sense? Why do you have to make tayammum? Or do you got to make tayammum and wudu at the same time? So you got to make, so basically you're saying you got to make tayammum, wudu, and wipe all in the same purification? Yes. That's what we're saying. Again, what does that picture look like? What does it look like?
Wait, before you get there, you're saying that this is if the doctor already
If the doctor exceeded, so that's we're assuming that the cast is a lot, it should only cover your wrist. But instead of covering your wrist, it covers all the way up to your elbow. The doctor's telling you, we made a mistake. We made it too big. We can't remove it. This is your situation. How do you make wudu now? Okay? So you're going to make wudu. When you get to your arm, you're going to wipe over the part where the cast is supposed to be. And as for the rest of your arm that you can't wash, you're going to make tayammum for that part there. How do you make tayammum? We're going to get to that later. Sheikh, you look confused. I lost you. Did I lose you?
I'm trying to find out why. That's what I'm trying to find out.
Why what? Why do you have to make tayammum?
Make it all free.
You're trying to find out why exactly. What are we saying? You're trying to find out why you have to make tayammum? Good question. You're making tayammum because you cannot wash the rest of your arm. That is, according to the doctor, you should be able to. That's number one. Number two, not only you can't wash it, but you also can't wipe over it. You might say, well, why can't you wipe over it? Because you have a cast covering it. Because the allowable wipe is only for the area that is supposed to be covered, not for the part that's not supposed to be covered. The extra part. You can't wipe over the extra part because the doctor made a mistake. So now in this case, you have to make tayammum for this additional portion here. Does that make sense? Sheikh, you still look confused.
No, I'm with you. My question was the tabu is a dry absolution, right?
Tayammum
is a dry absolution, like the dirt.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily.
Dirt.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean you go outside and you just. Well, we didn't really get to it yet. So tayammum, real quick, in case somebody might be sitting home with the cast like, bet I'm gonna go outside and put some dirt on my. No. Tayammum is. I'm sorry.
You can use the sand for it.
You use sand, but what do you got sand out here?
No.
So if you gotta make tayammum, what are you gonna do?
Good question.
All right. So when it comes to making tayammum, and we have a whole section covering tayammum, you can just wipe your hand on a desk because it's dust on it. You rub your hands in your face. In general, we're not going beyond that because there's a whole section about it that we're going to get to. But it doesn't mean you have to go outside and just look for a pile of dirt. That's not the understanding. All right. The third part. Let's say, for example, it's on the way it's supposed to be, but you don't have purification, assuming that that's the position that we're going to take. So Imam Ahmed, rahimahullah ta'ala, he holds the position that you must have purification before you have the cast on. The reality of it is that's not likely in most cases. So there's another position that many of the scholars also hold, is that you don't have to have purification before you have a cast. But if you're going to continue with the argument of the text, because the text says you must have purification. So let's assume that you are not able to get purification before you put on the what? The cast. What do you do? In this case, yes. In this case, you make tayammum. There's no wipe. You just make tayammum. And in the last case, what if it's too big and you don't have purification? Then you make tayammum again. However, this is just for argument's sake, just to give you a whole total picture. The reality of it is, many of the scholars hold that you don't need to have purification before you put it on, and Allah knows best. We're going to stop with that. Any questions? You sure?
I had a question about the last class. So it wasn't clear about the position of the obligation. We talked about the arkan, and we talked about the arkan, but it wasn't clear. We talked about the sunnah in the arkan. We didn't kind of clear the.
So I'm going to go back, right? The very thing we mentioned in last week's class, we said furuduhu sitta. The obligations are 6, right? The first one was washing your face. It's number 1. And then we said ghaslu yadayn, washing your hands. It's number 2. The third one is mashurat, wiping your head. It's number 3. The fourth one is ghaslu rijlayn, washing your feet. Is number 4. And number 5, number 6, we just talked about. It has to be in order, and it has to be muwalat, which means that no body part can be dry before it goes to the next. All of those are the arkan. So meaning, and that's a good question, meaning that if those things aren't done, you don't have wudu. So those are the 6 things that are necessary for a person to have wudu. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the arkan, right, and the wajibat, that's the same thing.
We didn't get there yet.
Okay.
So we didn't even talk about the wajibat.
No, we talked about shurut.
We talked about shurut, but the only reason why we spoke about the shurut is so that you can understand what is obligatory from the salat.
We talked about the arkan.
But we didn't even really talk about the shurut in detail.
No.
Always mentioned, we briefly covered shurut just to explain the difference between the two.
Yes.
That was the only reason why we mentioned it.
Okay, so that's what.
Yeah. The only reason, pay attention. The only reason why we spoke about the conditions is so that you don't get confused thinking a condition is a pillar. That was the only reason. The last class we had was all primarily about what is obligatory from the wudu. Even though we briefly discussed some of the sunan of wudu, but that wasn't the focus. The focal point was that we talked about what was necessary or obligatory from the wudu. All right. Now we're going to get into more detail later. It's all going to start coming together. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
As far as the time period.
Oh, good. I told you to make a note of that. The time period. I'm glad he said that. So when does the time start? The scholars of Islam differ on the starting time. What is that? The times, many of the scholars of Islam differ on the times, right? I thought I wrote that down here. All right. So the time slots are 2. Some say that when you put your socks on, and we're only using socks because that's, we're going to use socks. When you put your socks on, some of the scholars say the time starts when you break your wudu. Some say when you break your wudu. We're talking about wearing your sock for 1 day and 1 night if you're stationary, or wearing your sock for 3 days and 3 nights if you are a traveler, right? So some of the scholars say that it starts when you break your wudu. So let's say, for example, you broke your wudu so you got up, you prayed Fajr, you have your socks on, you break your wudu at 7 o'clock in the morning. Some say that your day and night starts at 7 o'clock in the morning. Does that make sense? Another position is that it starts as soon as you make your first wipe. So let's say you wake up in the morning, you pray Fajr, you put your socks on, you wipe. I mean, you don't even wipe yet. You put your socks on, you go to work, you pray, you go to work, you're at work all day, and don't break your wudu until Isha. You already prayed Isha. Let's say you go the whole day, no wudu. And then after that, you want to get up and pray after Isha. Some sunnah to use the bathroom, and you made wudu and wiped over it. Some say that your wiping will start, your day and night will start as soon as you made that wipe. I lost you?
So basically, you pray for put your socks on. We don't have to.
Let's make it. I'm gonna make it simpler. All right, because I just went to the extreme. I'm gonna back. No, I think I did. My example was. I'm gonna make it a little clearer, right? Yeah. Let's say Dhuhr. That's why I said I went to the extremes. But let's just say Dhuhr. You wake up, you make wudu, put your socks on, you pray Fajr. Cool. You break your wudu at 7 o'clock in the morning, but you don't make wudu. You don't wipe over until 12 o'clock in the afternoon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon for Dhuhr. That's where your wipe starts. That's where your day and night starts, from that time at Dhuhr. Well, so some say it start when you break, then yours would have started at 7. But if you take the other position, it starts when you wipe, it would have started at Dhuhr. You understand? That makes sense? Yes, you had to break in order to do the wipe. You can't, yes. I mean, break your wudu. That's what he's saying. Yes.
Is there a stronger opinion between the two?
So that's a good question. The brother asks, is there a stronger opinion between the two? So my question to everyone is, when the scholars of Islam say a strong position, what is considered a strong position? What does that mean to you? So listen to the question the brother said. MashaAllah. This is I'm glad he mentioned that point. So the brother said, whose position is stronger? Right? You have two different positions. One says after the wipe, one says when you break wudu. Which position is stronger in terms of evidence? No, there is no consensus on it. There's no scholarly consensus. Whose position is stronger? That's a really good question, right? So for those of you that have been attending classes of mine for some time, how do you answer that question? Yes.
It's another opinion.
Right, we get that it's another opinion, but when you say who's the strongest position,
Author of the book.
the strongest position is always the position of the one speaking. Does that make sense? And I'll explain why. Let's say you have Sheikh Fawzan, for example, and then you have Sheikh Uthaymeen. Sheikh Fawzan is going to say the strongest position is this. Sheikh Uthaymeen is going to say the strongest position is that. They're two separate positions. In order to be a person, and this is called tarjih. In Islam, this is called tarjih, meaning you have the ability to determine what is strongest based on the evidence on that particular issue. In order to do that, you would have to had studied the whole issue in its totality. That's number one. Know all the positions of the Salaf on this issue. Number two, meaning the companions. And number three, look at all the people today and what they have to say about it, and then you give your own verdict. So when you ask people what's the strongest position, I think the question that is probably more precise, because I'm going to tell you, the strongest position of the author of this book is when you break your wudu, of the author of this book. But I think the question that most people, when they ask that question, I think what they're really asking is, what is the majority position? Meaning, that's the question I think most people really want to ask, right? But you don't know what you're asking. What's the majority of the scholars of the past? What's their position on this? That's the question, right? Because now I can read you a list. So we have maybe 30 companions that hold this position and 15 hold that position. You understand? Or maybe 5 hold that position and 30 hold that position. So usually when we ask what's the strongest position, what we really want to say is, what is the majority position? What do the majority of the scholars of the past hold on this particular issue? Make sense? So the answer to that question is, according to this, because I'm not in a position to give tarjih, right? But according to the author of this book, the strongest position to him is that it is when you break your wudu. And actually it's safer too. It's safer, right? Because there's no difference of opinion on that. But there's a difference of opinion on if you wipe, whether or not you have to wait until you wipe. It starts when you wipe or starts when you break your wudu. Does that make sense? What do you mean by that? If we hold the position that wiping starts when you break your wudu, it's safer. No one's going to argue about that. But if another scholar says no, it starts when you first wipe. Someone might say, that may not be all the way accurate. Maybe when you first break your wudu. So what I mean by safer is that it's safer for you if you break your wudu, it starts then, as opposed to waiting until you wipe. That's the point. All right. Sure. Any other questions? No questions at all.
I have a question. This
Yes.
is the first day, and I think I'll continue.
Okay,
Who's
sure.
the author of the book?
Abu Musa al-Hajjawi. So this book is one of the classical texts of Hanbali fiqh. It's a staple book that many people. This book was written actually, or he died rather, in the year 660 Hijri, right? Musa Hajjawi is the author of this book, but this book goes back to another book called So we're not going to get into the whole detail of the book. I did at one time, but this book here is a book that many scholars of Islam teach, especially in the Arabian Peninsula. This is like one of the staple books that's used. In fact, you'll be hard pressed to find anybody who studied Islam in the Middle East and study, especially in places like Saudi Arabia, except that they study this book or variances to this book. But it's generally all this, especially when it comes to Hanbali fiqh, a fiqh of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And Imam Ahmad, he died in the year what? Does anyone know? 241 Hijri, which is 1,200 years ago, roughly. And the text and the science is still present. So so actually when we studied this in the universities and outside of universities, they would mention that in these types of books, it's very important to understand the language that they're using, because a lot of things may not be relevant to us today. A lot of issues, like no one really walks around with khuf, like who wears leather socks? No one, right? But then you have to understand that, okay, we have to make it relevant. How does it apply to us? No one wears leather socks. Back to the socks again. We can't wear socks that are see-through. We can't wear socks that you can't wipe over socks that are see-through. I didn't even mention that, right? See, I'm glad we started this conversation. We can't have socks that you can look and see your feet through them and then wipe over them. Huh? Because it's not covering what it needs to cover. Meaning covering, you shouldn't be able to see your foot. Some even mention that if we have socks and they have holes in them, like big holes in them, you can't wipe over that either, right? So then there's a debate. There's another difference of opinion with the companions. They will say, well, the companions will wear khuf, and underneath the bottom of them, there may be some small holes. Then some of the scholars say, well, as long as the jodab, the name of it, that thing does not change, then you can still wipe over it. So there's a whole, you see this book here? This is a separate book. This book here is called Al-Mughni, right? This book has about You see this book here is like one volume, right? This book is one of the explanations or one of the more detailed explanations of a book like this. This book might be 17 volumes. 17. This is the first volume, right? In this book, you'll find many different debates and differences among the scholars of the past talking about these very issues. In fact, the issues about wiping over your socks and taking your socks off, that's a whole debate from the time of the companions up until now, right? And there's a lot of issues like that. In any event, we're going to stop with it. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned about Tarjih.
All right. So Tarjih, what does that mean?
No, not what it means. But you got to kind of explain what it means.
Okay.
All right, but
who can make Tarjih?
Yeah, you know, the first condition that you said was that you had to have knowledge of the different
positions.
Is that usul al-fiqh?
Yes, that's from usul al-fiqh. So a person cannot, and I don't know how many times we have to repeat this, a person cannot give an Islamic verdict. You can't say this is halal and this is haram if you have not mastered usul al-fiqh. Mastered. I don't mean covered it, covered it, I studied a class online. I'm not saying you can't benefit studying a class online, but usul al-fiqh is a science that is taught to people that's going to give verdicts in Islam. We were fortunate to study it, but we're not giving verdicts in Islam. We studied a program called judicial law. So we were forced. A lot of our colleagues that went to school with us, they're judges in different countries. We're not like that. That's not our lane. What I'm saying is this material is very detailed. This means that you cannot sit in front of Muslims and say, this is halal, this is haram, because now the question now is, who are you? Who? You laugh. I'm serious. Who are you? I sat in Yemen for 4 years. What? This is a joke, but that only can happen in our community, though. People that look like us get hoodwinked all the time. We always looking for a star to follow. Somebody speaks really good English, we're done, right? The reality of it is this. It doesn't matter where it doesn't mean that you can't sit in Yemen and study and learn this stuff. I'm not saying that. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. What I'm saying is studying these sciences is not something to play with. It's not a game. Just because you may have come across, you may have read Ilm Usul from Sheikh Al-Thamaraat, rahimahullah, and you think you know Usul al-Fiqh because what's this book called? Ilm Usul. It's like a little small green book. Sheikh Al-Thamaraat, rahimahullah ta'ala, he wrote it. So a person might think he knows Usul al-Fiqh because he covered that. No. That's very introductory. Or you studied a book called Waraqat, which is a poem, and the poem form is very small. You might have covered that. So, I'm grounded in Usul al-Fiqh. No, you're not. That's just scratching the surface. But if you haven't studied it, you don't know that you're scratching the surface. You think, khalas, I'm the cut was salt, and you think you reached a certain level. The point is, when it comes to giving verdicts about Muslims and situations, you have to be careful. You have to know your lane. You as the listener or the one that is learning, you can't be afraid to ask questions. If somebody tells you, brother, this is haram, you should be like, what's your dalil? What's your evidence? Where'd you get that from? I don't know how many times we got to say this stuff. It's almost like people hear it, you hear it, but you're afraid to say it. Well, what's your, yes.
Not to cut you off, but what you say in your estimation, because you've been here a while too. Unfortunately, we've been like miseducated.
Yes, the people have been miseducated. Yes, grossly.
Now, like, we didn't hear
Yeah, that's a problem. Well, it's a problem. And the people that miseducated, may Allah pardon them, but they got to answer for that. They got to answer for that. May Allah pardon whoever taught miseducated. I don't think it was their intention. In all honesty, I don't think it was the intention to say, hey, I'm going to miseducate the Muslims. I don't think that was the case. I think what happens is a person reaches a certain level and they think, khalas, I'm here. What I know is but they didn't get to the end of the book. Or they might have stopped here, but they forgot it was a whole nother section. And this is why many of the Salaf, the scholars of the past, they stop with what they know. You stop at a certain level. You got people teaching books of Aqidah that they haven't even studied themselves. A brother said something to me a couple weeks ago. All the brothers, they say you're strong in fiqh and weak in Aqidah. I said, mashallah. A brother said, he sends me a message. He says, yeah, the people say that you, meaning myself, you're strong in fiqh and weak in Aqidah. That's okay. So my response to them is, I'm not strong in fiqh. I never said I was strong in fiqh. You did. And if you said I'm strong in fiqh, that means you don't know fiqh. So that right there puts you at a disadvantage. I would never consider myself strong in fiqh. I don't know anybody here that's strong in fiqh like that. So for you to say that I'm strong in fiqh and weak in Aqidah, and I know I'm not strong in fiqh, you already lost. Second part is Aqidah, right? If you're going to tell me I'm strong in fiqh, that means I know you don't know fiqh, and I'm a double dare and you don't know Aqidah either. So now you're really messed up. But this is what happens when people are miseducated. And they're allowed to be miseducated, and then they go around opening their mouths. And in the event, we didn't want to turn this into that, but it's the reality. May Allah help us and aid us. Anybody else have any questions? Strong in fiqh and weak in Aqidah. Me and I will say we start laughing. So whoever said that, they don't know us because we're not strong in fiqh. But the thing is, to the people here, we may appear to be strong in fiqh because you don't know fiqh. You don't know fiqh. If you knew fiqh, you'd be like, you are all right, but you didn't mention this and you left that out. And I'd be like, yeah, you're right. But see, you don't know that. You don't know that. The people that know. The people that don't know, is like when you're in land of the blind, one eye is a king, right? That's here. We just got one eye. And we're telling you we have one eye. That's the thing. I'm not telling you we got both eyes. We only got one. And we're not trying to be the king, but I'm just letting you guys know. We're not what you think we are. We're not that. Right? At any event, any other questions, inshallah? All right, we'll finish with that. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.